Whilst there seems to be a massive taboo around film franchises that keep on pumping out content simply for the sake of it, a big budget series that seems to avoid this trope is the John Wick franchise. Maybe this is due down to the likability of the star Keanu Reeves, who has become a very likeable movie star and everyone seems to love him. Maybe this is down to the great action sequences across the films in the franchise, or perhaps audiences just like characters who are very fond of dogs, who knows. One of my most anticipated movies of 2023 was John Wick Chapter 4, and I'm certainly thankful that I went to go and see it at the cinema. This is actually the first John Wick film I've seen in the cinema, and I think this is the best way of watching the movie. So if you're going to wait for this to come out on DVD, I would recommend you actually go out and bother to buy a ticket and watch it in the cinema to enjoy the full experience. Not to say that I think the movie wouldn't be worth watching at home on a smaller screen, but watching it on the big screen with an audience and taking in these great action sequences was just something on another level, something I haven't really experienced at the cinema for a long time. There seems to be two schools of thought in the cinematic experience. You can go see a dramatic piece of cinema, something from someone like Martin Scorsese, without these big bellowing action sequences and just hardcore drama. But sometimes you just want to see a movie, a popcorn movie, and with like Marvel and DC movies, they are sort of pushing out this sort of CG heavy look. I think John Wick is not without its CG elements, but I think these action sequences and the franchise overall takes it to a next level in terms of a cinematic experience. So I really think that is worth watching on the big screen if you can. The franchise sticks out to me for all the action sequences it does in camera, whereas there's going to be some CGI elements, and even in John Wick Chapter 4 you can recognise that there are some background CGI shots, and there's going to obviously be some CGI elements in the fight scenes, but the fact that they've done this choreography for these big action sequences, these fight sequences, more akin to something you'd have in a musical with a dance or something. But that sort of level of filmmaking, something we don't see in the Marvel franchise, for example, is something that's really worth going to the cinema for, and I really thoroughly enjoyed seeing these long take action sequences take place on the big screen. I've seen people say that this might be the best action movie of the last 10 years, and I can thoroughly agree with that. I think all the action sequences across the John Wick franchise are top tier when it comes to action films. I think some people will credit earlier movies from maybe the 70s, 80s or 90s action movies to say they are still the top tier, but I think in terms of what I've seen in the cinema recently, John Wick Chapter 4 really stands out as one of the best action films of all time. Keanu Reeves is such a likeable movie star, and he really attracts people and the audiences just because of who he is as a person, and people say he's one of the kindest people in Hollywood, and just seeing him on the film set do all these action sequences, something that isn't really done because stuntmen have to do a role and they don't want to have big stars injured in it. I think Tom Cruise stands out as someone who's really going to go to the next level and refuses to let anyone do any stunts for him, similar to someone like Jackie Chan, who can't have stuntmen and he can't even get insurance for doing these stunts in movies because he's very likely to get hurt. But seeing Keanu Reeves take on these action sequences, and it's reported that he does about 90% of his own stunts, is very impressive, and you can tell he's had a great time working on this franchise, and you see behind the scenes stuff of him preparing to do kung fu, gun fu, driving sequences, and in this movie we get to see him play with nunchucks. From my understanding of the weapon the nunchucks are, they are very hard to use and very hard to not harm yourself by using them, and we get to see Keanu Reeves play with that and use them in a long fight sequence that really stands out as something really fun. Seeing an actor do long takes of action sequences and seeing it's really them is something really special. It's more akin to the dancing of a musical, and I think the director and Keanu Reeves have also said that this is more like the choreography in a dance movie or a musical rather than fight sequences. I mean, the fight scenes overall in many Hollywood movies aren't that realistic in terms of how violence is portrayed or how many hits they can take before getting killed. However, this sort of element of this beautiful choreographed dance work just makes it look so cinematic, and it really stands out in terms of an action sequence. Some people may be disappointed to just compare it to a dance rather than an actual fight, but this level of fantasy violence really is a cinematic look, and it's like watching a dance sequence, and I think it works so well in this movie as it did in the previous films as well. The film overall doesn't have a very extensive plot, it just figures on John Wick's character trying to get revenge on the High Table for how he was treated in the last movie, and sort of the new characters he's going to meet and he has to take on, who are trying to kill him before he can kill members of the High Table. The beats of the film surround him getting closer and closer to coming to some compromise in which he can finally exit this horrible life in which he wants to get out of. It's said that he believes that he can go on and kill every member of the High Table, but ultimately he knows that is unrealistic for himself, and he's reminded by his allies in this movie that eventually someone's going to get him. So if he's going to survive in any way, he's going to have to look for a different approach in order to escape this life once again. Interestingly enough, I believe I've read somewhere that Keanu Reeves only has about 400 words in this movie that he speaks throughout the whole time, and this just goes to show how action heavy the film is, and the sort of stoicism his character's showing about not being involved, and it's his interactions with these other characters that sort of drive the plot and the story forward. We see the return of characters from the franchise, including Ian McShane's Winston, Lance Reddick's Charon, and Laurence Fishburne's The Bowery King, as well as new characters like Kane, as played by Donnie Yen, and the Marquis, who's played by Bill Skarsgård, who's a very over-the-top, maniacal villain, and I think he works really well to contrast who John Wick is as this hero. This film does really feel like a video game in the way that the character of John Wick leaves a line of dead bodies behind him and a trail of destruction, and we don't really acknowledge that this character, despite being the protagonist of this film, massacres maybe hundreds of people, and over the franchise he may have killed over 500 people, though they're mainly nameless NPCs as it were, and that sort of makes it alright for this protagonist to go forward. One minor criticism I have of this movie is the fight sequences. Not to say that they aren't impressive in almost every way, but I think because they go on for such a long time, they're only limited in the environments they're shooting in, how much action can be done that doesn't seem repetitive. So I feel like there's about 5 or 6 distinct long take fight sequences in the movie, and they may last about 10 to 15 minutes each. However, I feel like they could have cut each of them in half perhaps. Not all of them, but I think maybe one of the first action sequences in the movie that takes place in Japan does feel great for the first 5 minutes, and then it gets a bit repetitive for the next 5 minutes until a new element into the fight is introduced. And that was just something I wanted to acknowledge, because in no way do I think the film is perfect, but it's certainly enjoyable. I wasn't going to be like, I'm going to look at my watch and think, oh, this film's boring. And to be honest, this film's a very long film, but I don't think it drags at all. I only want to point out that these action sequences go on for a long time, maybe for the sake of going on for a long time, but I still think they're impressive and fun to watch. And if anyone's enjoyed the other films in this franchise, you're going to love this film. And I'm not sure where I'd put it in the franchise so far. I'm undecided at the moment if this is going to be better than the third film or if this is the top film in the franchise. With the introduction of all these other characters, and I think a film franchise that wants to expand and grow can throw characters in for the sake of telling spin-off stories, I think this film doesn't really do that, but after seeing some of these new characters introduced, I am keen to see these characters get their own movies. Donnie Yen's character, Kane, a blind assassin, he seems to be a shoo-in for a spin-off of his own. I don't necessarily think that's the way they would go just by introducing him. I think his character plays a key and pivotal role in the plot, so this film isn't just like a launching pad to get him his own movie in this John Wick franchise. There's been talk about other spin-offs. I think there's going to be a Continental spin-off looking at a young Winston. There's a spin-off with Ana de Armas playing a ballerina, and she hasn't been introduced in the franchise as of yet, and I'm keen to see how that would tie into the John Wick franchise overall. I did really expect to see her cameo in this movie, and I don't really think this is a spoiler, but she doesn't appear in this film at all. But you know, this film just does seem to be telling the final chapter, or one of the final chapters, of the John Wick franchise. Not to say that I don't think there'll be more John Wick movies, I think there is potential, but both Keanu Reeves and the director have said that they want to put this character to rest for a little bit. So I think they're going to expand this world, and something that hasn't really been done in the franchise overall. We get introduced in the first movie of John Wick being Baba Yaga, this like legendary assassin, and we get introduced to the Continental Hotel, this sort of world of like assassins and criminals, and it gets expanded in each film in an interesting way, introducing like the high table and these sort of blood oaths, and I think they could really expand that in the franchise a lot more. In the film so far, they've only really introduced them as concepts and not fleshed them out. And as these seem to be very action heavy, and that's not a problem at all, but I think they could really delve into some interesting lore across these future spin-offs and any sequel to John Wick that we might get in the future. Overall, I highly recommend that you go and see John Wick Chapter 4 at the cinema. I will be watching it again if I get the chance to, but I am going to be getting the Blu-ray or be watching it on TV at some point down the line, and I don't think the film is going to be ruined by seeing it on a smaller screen down the line, but I would really encourage you, if you get the chance to go see it on the big screen, go do it, you'll thank me for it later. I certainly don't think these films are for everyone. I doubt Martin Scorsese will go and see it. It almost feels like a superhero movie in a certain way, but I do really enjoy these films, and I think they just deliver something I have not seen in the cinematic landscape that is dominated by comic book movies, although one could argue this is almost a comic book superhero movie in itself. So that's it for my review on John Wick Chapter 4. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the film in the comments below, and let me know which characters in the John Wick franchise you would like to see get their own spin-off movie or TV show. That's it for now. Please give this video a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and make sure to click the bell icon to receive notifications for all of my videos. Thanks for tuning in.